From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. In April 2019, the Ukrainian presidential elections were well underway, with one star frontrunner.
Well, Zelensky, of course, was a very successful showman in Ukraine, as well as in Russia, actually. He was very popular in Russia. He used to take part in this thing called КВН, which started in the Soviet Union and involved students from different areas competing against each other.
Путину пришло письмо. Перепишите свое население 9 раз, и вам будет счастье.
It's kind of like a student rag type of thing, but a lot more professional and broadcast all over the entire country. And Zelensky was a star in that in Russia. And of course, having had a very successful television show where he played the president of Ukraine, for a lot of people, it was a surprise when he announced that he was going to stand for president of Ukraine. You would have imagined at the time that Trump would have felt kind of sympathetic towards him, as they're both showmen in some kind of respects. They're both kind of political outsiders as well, in a way. So, yeah, I mean, the signs seemed good.
And Donald Trump was US president at that point. How did he respond to Zelensky being elected? I mean, was it warm?
Yeah, he was very enthusiastic. His comment was, this was a great election victory. We're looking forward to working with President Zelensky. He also offered his support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and condemned Russian aggression.
How times change.
Zelensky has done a terrible job, a dictator without elections. But think of it, a modestly successful comedian. President Zelensky talked the United States into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won. And the only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle. That's an expression we use now.
Many allies were offended by this. Some pointed out the clear inaccuracies. But why has Trump turned against Zelensky the way he has? How did an impeachment, a war, and a dodgy phone call take the two from friends to, well, less good friends? The story today, inside Trump's obsession with Zelensky.
My name is Marc Bennetts. I'm a foreign correspondent for The Times and The Sunday Times. And I was based in Moscow until 2022 and the start of Russia's all-out war in Ukraine.
Marc, we were just discussing new President Zelensky back in 2019 and first-term US President Donald Trump, and how on paper you'd think get on quite well, TV men, now on the world stage. The relationship did start off well. How did it progress through 2019 and beyond?
There were very positive signs regarding the relationship after Zelensky was elected in 2019, but things started to get strange quite quickly. In early 2019, Trump's allies started kind of rumors about Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden in Ukraine, suggesting that there was some kind of wrongdoing and that Biden had pressured a Ukrainian prosecutor not to look into the Ukrainian energy company where Hunter Biden was on the board of directors. Obviously, for President Trump, that would have been quite beneficial because Joe Biden was the front runner in the 2022 election when Trump was standing for re-election. So kind of any dirt, essentially, that President Trump and his allies could have dug up on the Bidens would have improved Trump's chances of re-election.
And the allegation was what? That Hunter Biden had pocketed cash as part of some deal to do with the Ukrainian energy firm. Is that what it was?
It was very murky. I mean, we should say that there's never been any conclusive evidence of wrongdoing. There have been allegations of corruption at Burisma, which was a Ukrainian energy company, where Hunter Biden was on the board of directors. Trump's allies alleged that Hunter Biden was A, somehow mixed up in his corruption, and B, that Joe Biden was tried to get the Ukrainian prosecutor involved, removed from his post, which, if had been true, obviously would have been illegal and very damaging for Joe Biden. Then in July 2019, President Trump called Zelensky and asked him to get to the bottom of all this.
And there's that awkward press conference, isn't there, where they are talking about that phone call.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to me to be here. And it's better to be on TV than by phone. Yeah. I think.
Trump and Zelensky have a joint press conference at the United Nations, and Zelensky is kind of put on the spot by reporters and asked about the call.
President Zelensky, have you felt any pressure from President Trump to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden?
Obviously, he's standing next to Trump, but he doesn't want to say anything that's going to annoy the Democrats. And so Zelensky gives this very kind of non-committal answer where he says, we had, I think, a good phone call.
Sure, that we had, I think, good phone call. It was normal. We spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed me. Yes.
His exact words were, it was normal. We spoke about many things. I think you read that nobody pushed me. And that was essentially what he said. And then Trump butted in and said, in other words, no pressure.
President Trump,
because you know what? There was no pressure. And you know there was, and by the way, you know there was no pressure. All you have to do is see it, what went on the call.
Eventually that call led to Trump being impeached for the first time later that year over allegations that he had essentially tried to blackmail Zelensky into announcing the opening of an investigation against the Bidens, and threatened him that he would withhold almost $400 million in U.S. security aid for Ukraine if he didn't. This is 2019, so this is before Russia's all-out invasion in 2022. But Russian troops had already been in eastern Ukraine for 5 years, since 2014. And U.S. security aid was vital for the Ukrainians to hold back Russian troops and Russian proxy troops from eastern Ukraine. As an aside, we should also mention that President Trump was actually the first U.S. leader to give weapons, lethal weapons, to the Ukrainians when he gave them anti-tank missiles in 2017. So Zelensky was obviously very keen, and it was kind of vital for Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity to keep these weapons coming. So he was placed in a dilemma, essentially. He either had to announce that Ukraine was investigating the Bidens over these allegations of corruption. And if he had done that, he would have damaged his relationship with the Democrats.
An election was looming.
Possibly
so,
fatally, an election was looming. He didn't know who was going to win. So he either pleases Trump and then possibly seriously annoys the next U.S. president, or he loses the U.S. security aid that they needed to hold back the Russian forces. So then it's kind of murky, but there was a New York Times report which suggested that after a lot of internal debate in Kyiv, Zelensky and his advisors decided that the benefits of U.S. security aid actually outweighed the dangers of annoying Biden. And Zelensky was scheduled to announce the investigation against the Bidens in a CNN interview. But then the news that Trump had frozen the aid because he didn't get what he wanted from Zelensky broke, and Congress was in uproar. And then Trump quickly released the $400 million in security aid, and Zelensky was let off the hook. So he canceled the interview of CNN.
Yes, and in his account of all of this, because as you say, this featured as part of Donald Trump's impeachment, which was brought in December 2019, his point was that there was no quid pro quo on this. I wasn't trying to pressure Zelensky into doing something politically beneficial for me in exchange for security assistance.
Trump denied he pressured Zelensky in any way whatsoever. I think he described it as the perfect phone call, but his claims were contradicted by a number of U.S. officials, including the U.S. ambassador to the European Union at the time, who said that pressure on Kyiv had come at Trump's express direction. And it wasn't just the aid as well. It was allegedly U.S. officials were told to hold off on an invite to Zelensky to the White House unless he again launched the investigation against the Bidens.
Wasn't there also a side plot to all of this about Trump allegedly pushing Zelensky to investigate whether Ukraine had hacked the Democrats in 2016? Is that another sideshow?
That was the second investigation that Trump wanted the Ukrainians to open, because there were allegations at the time that Russia had helped actually Trump get elected, and installed him in the White House as their own candidate through a kind of vast and sophisticated hacking campaign, which was never proven conclusively. But obviously there were still kind of suspicions hanging over Trump once he'd entered the White House. And there's also very unproven conspiracy theory that it was Ukrainian hackers who actually broke into the Democratic Party's computer systems. And Trump wanted the Ukrainians to investigate that. And Zelensky refused to do this as well.
And that allegation was dismissed by US intelligence and also some of Trump's own team as well eventually. But you can see the political impetus, if you were Donald Trump, for why you might want to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we should also probably mention that Trump was so keen to get these investigations launched by the Ukrainians that he even dispatched his own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, to Kyiv to try and push forward the probe into the Bidens. Giuliani was quite open about it. He said, some people would say it's illegal. It's not illegal, although I guess you could call it improper, or words to those effect.
So if he's now had these 2 attempted investigations rebuffed by Zelensky, is the takeaway from all of that he must feel like he doesn't like Zelensky? He can't get what he wants from him?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously tempting to draw the conclusion that Trump blamed Zelensky for not kind of standing up and saying President Trump did absolutely nothing wrong, as he claimed later that he said, but he actually didn't at the time. Yeah? I mean, he didn't say anything of the sort. But there's a Soviet-born American businessman called Lev Parnas who worked with Giuliani in Ukraine whilst he was wandering around the Ukrainian capital trying to dig up dirt on the Bidens. And Parnas later turned against Trump. And last year he told Politico, the US website, that Trump hates Ukraine and that he blames it for everything that happened to him, for all his problems during his first term with the impeachment and so on. So is this why Trump seems to personally dislike Zelensky? I mean, obviously we can't get into Trump's head, but there does seem to be circumstantial evidence that he blames him for the embarrassment of the impeachment proceedings and for not coming to his rescue, as it were.
We're just over a month into Donald Trump's second term, and it has been clear already that he does take grudges seriously and he does remember things. This is now arguably on show with his dealings with Zelensky. What is Trump's issue with Zelensky right now, as he explains it?
So Trump's position on Zelensky has evolved quite dramatically as from his initial endorsement of Zelensky when he won his first election in 2019, and from his support for Ukraine against Russian aggression. But since winning his second term, he's unleashed a series of quite remarkable aggressive attacks on Zelensky that are essentially echoing Russia's view of Zelensky, which is that A, he's a dictator because he hasn't held elections since the start of Russia's all-out invasion.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast.
He's also accused him, without any evidence whatsoever, of seeking to continue the conflict for his own personal financial gain, suggesting that Zelensky is making money from the gravy train of US aid. And then, incredibly, he also accused Zelensky and Ukraine of starting the war against Russia.
But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
It's interesting how Zelensky's trying to handle Trump. The received wisdom amongst world leaders, it seems, used to be don't criticize Trump, don't give him a reason to attack you back. But Zelensky has been a bit firmer and pushed the boat out a bit more and tried to correct him.
Well, I think Zelensky's comment that Trump lives in a disinformation bubble, as he put it, after Trump had alleged that Ukraine started the war, was just a very human reaction. I mean, it's not really an issue of politics. It's an issue of something which has destroyed tens of thousands of lives, millions of lives, if you talk about people who had to flee the country as well, has killed hundreds of thousands of people so far and wiped Ukrainian towns and cities off the earth. So, I mean, Zelensky had to say something, not just as a politician, I think as a human being, he had to say something. He couldn't just let Trump sit there and say that you started the war, you shouldn't have started it. He had to hit back in some way. Obviously, Trump has very thin skin. This wasn't something that he appreciated. And then since then, we've seen his attacks on Zelensky begin to spiral of claims that America has given Ukraine $300 billion in aid.
The United States has given $350 billion because we had a stupid, incompetent president and administration. 350.
When in fact it's no more than 100 billion. And he's now trying to portray the money that was given to Ukraine by the Biden administration as a loan that has to be paid back.
But here's worse. Europe gave it in the form of a loan. They get their money back. We gave it in the form of nothing. So I want them to give us something for all of the money that we put up. So we're asking for rare earth and oil, anything we can get.
And then kind of culminating in the unprecedented decision of America to side with Russia, Belarus, and North Korea in rejecting a resolution at the United Nations condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine.
And on Trump's, some would say parroting the Russian view, others would say, and clearly identify.
Some would say he is parroting Russian view.
Yeah, or at least he seems to constantly give Russia the benefit of the doubt where others might not. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? Because there's once upon a time where people were saying it's because he's in the pay of the Russians, they have compromat on him. There are lots of investigations into all of that. Nothing came of that. Is it just that he is attracted to strongman Putin, as people say? I mean, what is it that makes him want to give Russia the benefit of the doubt all the time?
No one knows for sure why Trump seems to be so taken with Putin and also other kind of dictators across the world, from North Korea, for example. There was, it's kind of unclear how seriously we should take this, but there was a former KGB official in Kazakhstan who wrote on Facebook the other day that he was one of the KGB operatives who was given the task of recruiting Trump in the 1980s. His code name was Krasnov. There's no proof of this, of course, but there does seem to be something strange going on in that Trump was asked, he was asked yesterday, I think, do you consider Putin to also be a dictator?
If you called Zelensky a dictator, would you use the same words regarding Putin?
Putin is like essentially the definition of a dictator in the modern world. Yeah, I mean, he's like his opponents, political opponents, his genuine political opponents, put it that way, are either dead or in prison or been forced into exile. There's essentially no freedom of speech anymore in Russia. So he kind of ticks all the boxes of a dictator who's been in power for 25 years. But Trump said, I don't use that word. It's not a word I like to throw around.
I don't use those words lightly. I think that we're going to see how it all works out. Let's see what happens. I think we have a chance of a really good settlement between various countries.
But he was quite happy to call Zelensky, who was democratically elected in 2019, a dictator. So it's not really clear. I mean, is Trump just attracted to kind of strong men? Is he kind of like a typical kind of bully who prefers to side with the stronger force in any conflict? Does Putin's worldview kind of align with his? Mm-hmm. As for the claims that he's a Russian agent, I mean, we don't know, and maybe we'll never know. But obviously his actions, comments in the last few weeks are going to make people start to think about that again quite seriously.
And to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt, could you see all of this as an effective buttering up of the Russians to get them in a good place round the table to maybe extract some concessions in a way that someone who was bullishly against Putin like Biden might not have been able to do?
Well, it's unclear what concessions he can extract. Lots of people aren't entirely sure that Trump even really understands the essence of Russia's war in Ukraine. He seems to think it's just about like a chunk of territory in the Donbass. that Russia wants and Ukraine won't give it to them. But as officials in Moscow have pointed out dozens of times, it's not about that. It's about what they see as kind of a restructuring of the global order, the future of NATO, the future of Ukraine as a neutral state. So for Putin, it's not just about getting its territory. It's about turning Ukraine into as Moscow-friendly a government or country as possible. So I don't really understand what concessions Trump could actually get from Putin. I mean, Trump said yesterday again that Putin's agreed that European peacekeepers could be deployed to Ukraine. But the Russians have said multiple occasions that they're categorically opposed to this, that this can't happen. And Putin even came out and rebuked Trump's claim.
And who knows how Trump and Putin will get on when they maybe meet again at some summit, which is being dangled. But we do know for certain that Trump and Zelensky will be meeting soon, maybe this week, maybe next, once this deal to give the US access to some of Ukraine's mineral rights in exchange for the military they've had in the past and maybe some security guarantees going forward. How do you think that meeting will go?
I imagine Trump will try to lean quite heavily on Zelensky, but it's unclear really what he can do. I mean, if Trump gives Zelensky an ultimatum that either you agree to surrender territory to Russia or you give us all your kind of critical minerals, and if you don't, we'll cut military aid. I mean, I think there's always a chance that Zelensky will just tell him to politely get lost, because even if America withdraws all its military aid, that'll make it extremely difficult for Ukraine to fight, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have to surrender. They would still have European aid. They're now producing their own weapons, and I don't think that Ukraine would agree to a deal with Russia that in the long run would leave Kyiv in danger of being invaded by the Russians again down the road, or that would, as Zelensky said, bankrupt Ukraine for the next 10 generations if it hands over all its critical minerals. So I don't know. I mean, I think I would be very surprised if there's any massive agreement comes out of this. I could be wrong, of course. But there's also the possibility that it could kind of end in a defining rift or rupture in US-Ukrainian relations. I think there's only so far the Ukrainians can be pushed.
That was Times foreign correspondent Marc Bennetts. If you found that interesting, why not try this on for size? Our episode from earlier in the week, William Hague on the deeply alarming lawlessness of Trump's presidency.
We were like family in a way. You know, if I think of the relationship I had with Hillary Clinton, who was my counterpart for a good half of the time I was foreign secretary, we became great friends. We're still in touch. You not only are allies, you sit next to each other alphabetically. The United Kingdom and the United States are near each other in the alphabet. And so at a NATO meeting or a UN meeting, you're sitting right next to each other. And Hillary Clinton used to say to me, William, we've been at this meeting for 7 hours. We don't have enough fun. Why don't we go out and have some dinner after this? So this situation now, where the United States is on a whole series of things, of global affairs, from the Western Alliance to international law to net zero to overseas aid to the future of European security to trade going off in a different direction, that is a totally different world from the one that I was dealing with.
There is a link to that in the description of this podcast. Today's producers were Olivia Case and Edith Rousselot. The executive producer was Fiona Leach. Theme composition was by Mao Lassetto and sound design was by David Crackles. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.